Welcome everyone to our 2021 Self-Direction Virtual Conference Series. My name is Molly Morris and I'm a Senior Technical Assistance Consultant at Applied Self-Direction. Thank you so much for joining us today for this session entitled Authentic Stakeholder Engagement, a discussion with Colorado's Participant Direction Program Policy Collaborative. I'm just going to run through a few quick housekeeping issues before we begin. You can submit your questions and comments at any time during the session by using the Q&A pod in the lower left-hand corner of the Adobe Room. If you experience any audio or technical issues during today's presentation, you can send us a message again by using the Q&A pod or by emailing us at info@appliedselfdirection.com and we'll be happy to help you. I am so excited to introduce our speakers for today. Julie Riskin is an active member of the Colorado Participant Direction Programs Policy Collaborative, or PDPPC. She's the Executive Director of the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition and a client of a self-directed program. Kurt Wolf is a Stakeholder co-chair of the PDPPC. He's a Consumer-Directed Attendant Support Service peer trainer and the client of a self-directed program. And John Barry manages stakeholder relations for the Office of Community Living at the Colorado Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing, and he is the department co-chair of the PDPPC. So with all of those introductions being covered, I'm thrilled to turn things over to Julie to get us started.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having us here today. We are thrilled to be able to talk about the Colorado experience of, client, consumer. I'm going to use the word client, but client, consumer, stakeholder involvement. The tagline of our organization, the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition, is nothing about us without us ever, and the ever is in all caps for a reason. And we really believe that the core of participant direction is that we not only need to control our services, but we need to be involved in the policy decisions of how these programs run. And when I say we, I'm talking people with disabilities. So we'll get started. PDPPC, the worst acronym ever. But what is it? It's the Participant Directed Programs Policy Collaborative. And so we have two participant-directed programs in Colorado that cover a number of, all but one of the adult waivers. And those are consumer-directed attendant support services, which is peer consumer direction, and in-home support services, which is self-direction but with an agency involved. Policy collaborative is important because this is really a place where all of the different groups come together to talk about, to figure out what the policy should be of these programs. So how did it start? Basically, it started the way a lot of things start like this. So people with disabilities, we were mad at the state. This was during a time of a lot of change and controversy. We had gone from a pilot program where it was smaller and there was a lot of flexibility to a waiver, to a regular waiver service, which had always, of course, been the plan, but that created some changes. There were a lot of communication issues. It wasn't properly staffed at the state level, and the disability community was very unhappy. And when we first got started, because it started out of anger, we had to work through many issues to create an equitable system. So what are some of the things we had to work through, or how did it progress? So number one, and this is not something you do once and you're done, but you do all the time when you're dealing with systems and dealing with equity. So one is power dynamics. You've got to talk about power dynamics because you're in a situation where there's the state that holds a lot of power, there's FMSs involved that hold some power. Because of the IHSS component in our program, there's agencies that do hold some power over their clients. And then there's people with disabilities, and the whole purpose of consumer direction is to give people with disabilities more power, right? So we talk a lot about power dynamics, and we set up structures and practices to address power dynamics and to put some equity back in the room. And John does a lot of that in his facilitation. But one of the ways we deal with power dynamics is we have pretty strict rules around voting rights. We make sure that the majority of people voting are clients or authorized reps who stand in the stead of clients, but people with disabilities. Agencies only get one vote, and same with FMSs. So there might be 3 or 4 people from an FMS that attends the meeting. That FMS gets one vote, and the state gets no votes because, again, they're the state agency. They do have a certain amount of veto power, and we are going to them with recommendations that they can choose to do or not. I'll talk about that in a minute. We work on specific projects. We initially kind of came up with almost like a global plan because there were so many things that had to be fixed that had been broken. And we also have the ability to make formal recommendations to the state. We vote on them. They're written out. The state has a certain amount of time to get back to us in writing. And I'll get into that a little bit more. We also had to figure out what's policy versus operations. The state can't run a program if there's 50 people engaged in every operational decision. That's just not feasible. Policy is really the broad direction, and that's where it's important for the disability voice to be. Now, if the operations aren't going correctly, that's kind of a management issue that we would need to take up with the state. But we've had to really be clear and define and understand what's policy versus operations and stick to the policy side. So where are we now? One of the things before COVID, we always had a remote option and an in-person option. We're a large state, so no matter what's going on, not everyone's going to be able to show up in person because some people live 8 hours away. We also have some people that might be, really homebound or close to it. So in the past, we used to have, there'd be people in the room and people on the phone, and one group or the other would always be kind of shut out. The people on the phone couldn't hear the people on the room, or there would be a lot of background noise. And then the people in the room would be really annoyed by people on the phone who weren't muting. And it was just challenging. I mean, we made it work, but really having everything remote has leveled the playing field, although there's certainly a lot of downsides, in terms of relationship building, all of that, to being 100% remote. But in this case, it did level the playing field. We're currently in a place where we're revisiting the purpose to create some more participant-focused interaction, just because that's the need, and also because we've evolved. I mean, this committee's been around for probably about 10 years now, and so the needs that we had initially have changed and evolved just over time. For a long time, subcommittees worked great, but they're really not working well right now, so we're rethinking that. And part of having a good committee is you need to be willing to rethink things as you're going through and make changes. Some of the challenges we've had, and again, always able to overcome, one is varying levels of knowledge in the group. We try and get new people, so you have some people like, Kurt and I that have done this for years, are very involved in Medicaid rules and laws, and you might have someone else who's maybe newly disabled and they've only been on Medicaid for 6 months, and they don't know the acronyms or the lingo or the history. So how do we keep it moving to keep getting stuff done, but also bringing people along? One way is to have some orientation, a buddy system, but you've got to be intentional about that. Sorry, I forgot to move the slide. Another issue is just, there's a lot of this work is contracted out on the state level. So you have, procurement laws at the state level versus transparency. The state cannot involve 50 people in who we're going to hire to run this program next, but we wanted to say, or who's going to make a decision about which FMSs we hire. So what we've done with that is we've had one representative who does have to sign a confidentiality agreement, which means we've got to trust our representative because they can't come back and talk about a personnel decision in an open meeting. And then follow through. Sometimes in meetings people say, oh yeah, I really want to be involved with this, that, or the other. The state will set up a subcommittee, and then people don't always follow through. That's an issue with any kind of volunteerism, but it is something to just be aware of and deal with. So I wanted to end by talking about 3 areas of success, and there's certainly areas where we're not successful, and these are areas where we go to the state and say we want something done differently, and the state comes back and says, like yes, no, or kind of. When they say no or when they don't do what we want, then it's up really to the advocacy community outside of this context to decide if we want to, escalate. Do we want to change a law? Do we want to go up to a director? What do we want to do? But this is a really good kind of neutral process that really levels the playing field. So one is the top wage. We have budget authority, which we feel is really essential for participant directed. We had for years the same top amount that you could pay. And I can't remember what the amount was, but it was getting, because the cost of living has gone up so much, it was getting to be not enough. We made a recommendation for a certain amount. The state came back with a different amount that was a little bit lower, but they had a good rationale for how they came to that amount, so we accepted it. Paid sick time, that's another one where we didn't get exactly what we wanted, but we're getting there. We feel that our workers should get paid sick time. We did get that done on an emergency basis over COVID. Then our state passed a ballot initiative that now says we've got to do it. So the state is figuring it out, even though initially the state's no was based on CMS, not their belief. But it's something we got involved with the ballot initiative because we knew that everyone should get paid sick time, or at least that's what the clients thought. And then, notice and information with EVV, and I know there's some questions, and I'm running out of time, so we could maybe talk about that later, but we've been able to make a lot of changes in EVV, and we talk about it at every meeting. Of course, as clients, we hate EVV, but that isn't something our state had a choice about, so we've worked with our state to make it as less painful as possible. And they've been pretty responsive on that. Even though there's things about EVV that are just bad, particularly with self-direction, we try and make it as less horrible as possible in Colorado. So I'm not going to turn it over to my colleague Kurt Wolf, who is the co-chair, who's going to talk kind of about how he's approached leadership and the role of the co-chair.
Well, hello there, everybody. Thank you for joining this here, and I am the co-chair. I was kind of started out voluntold in this and started out really as a client, had a lot of questions on the program, trying to figure out what this all meant, was pretty newly injured at the time. And basically what I do is I bring to the table a business background. I worked as a executive for a pretty large company years ago, and really it really surprised me at how meetings were ran at the government level as opposed to in business. So I really felt I brought something good to the table as far as maybe how to rearrange how things were being run. So the first thing you got there, and there's a lot of people involved, and that's why I had that up there. And it was, it wasn't just about myself. It wasn't just about the disabled people in there, the people with disabilities. It was really about the caregivers as well as all the agencies involved and case managers involved. And I quickly realized that this is a really big group of people that need to be involved in making decisions. So it was hard to figure out how to communicate that message to everyone. And so I will say I probably had to listen 3, 4, 5, 6 months before I even really got even the lingo and everything that was going on in the community. But there was a bit of a learning curve. It was a whole new agenda for a lot of people, all with their own agenda, because of course everyone had their story they wanted to say and were working hard on trying to get their agenda accomplished. I had found this is kind of amusing because I know when I first joined, it seemed like everyone was angry. Everyone had their agenda. They were making their point. They were reiterating their point. They bring it up 3, 4, 5, 6 different times. And it seemed like we talked a lot about it. It was basically a way for everyone to complain, but nothing, it seemed like it take forever to get anything done. So in listening to that, and I worked with a lot of great groups of people in the past, but when everyone's talking at once, nothing gets done. And short of running the meeting according to the rules of Hoyle or Robert's rules, we had to find out a better way to run it. And I think I saw we had a lot of great rules already. It was just very hard when people were speaking over, and John did a remarkable job back in the day with, trying to keep people on point, but people kept coming back to making their point over and over. So after I figured out what the whole acronym of PDPPC was, it probably took me a year to figure out what that really meant. I realized collaborative was a really good word for what was trying to happen here. You know, we really needed to work together to reach one common goal, step by step, prioritize those steps, old-fashioned prioritizing, picking what the big nuggets are to get done, and basically combining all that talent to make good things happen. And so we really had to learn from a group and had to contribute from and learning from the others in the group as well. And really brought to this next level, it's really a complicated process between collaborative intelligence, where you start out there with low participation. Now I'm going to say the participation wasn't really low, but it seemed like there's only a few people that got their words in. So we really kind of taking that in mind, realizing that to be a collaboration, we really had to evolve to the next level. So that was really kind of how I came across my goal of trying to make things happen and trying to give a little direction. We had good success at that, and we got things together, but it seems like as we got more people together, participation seemed to be, and right now it actually seems like it's low. We got a lot of good things accomplished. I think they're involved and people are listening and want to be involved, but at some point it gets to the point where they feel like we feel like we're more of an informational committee. So right now we're at that step right now where we're really encouraging other people to get involved, what they would do different, what they would wish could happen, and how we could get to the next level as far as a group. But really, it's not to be unexpected when things are actually getting done. The key, though, is to keep encouraging that participation and draw out those new agendas that people maybe are a little bit afraid to speak up and say. Julie mentioned this earlier, and the thing is we had a really good mutual set of rules already established there at the end of every agenda we have on our meeting. Some of the big ones here was, number one, I think, is people reiterating over and over. We really make a point of just saying ditto instead of going over and over about the remarks. John does a great job managing the queue, as Julie mentioned. And what we do is we try to have someone on the phone talk, someone in the in-person meetings talk. And now, right now, what has been pretty beneficial is that, as Julie mentioned, we leveled that playing field by going with the Google Meets, and it gets to be a little bit more controlled and give direction so everyone has a say. One thing that's constant was a big issue is acronyms. You see, we'll even say acronym just as a word because people start using what is the EVV or what is the EBD program or what is HCBS. And if you're really not up to speed, and you just are talking over everyone's head. The biggest one is at the very bottom is people get very passionate about their position. And we added this one, and they really needed to understand that not to confuse being passionate about the situation as opposed to anger. People with disabilities, I mean, we have to really fight hard for being heard and being understood that we have an issue, we have issues that need to be addressed, and not everyone really appreciates or sees them until they actually get in that position. So that's one thing I would always say, when you get people involved, make sure people understand passionate's not angry. It's just trying to make your point and making sure you get heard. With that, my role is really about more support and advice. I get a lot of calls after the fact. I want to give some guidance on how to best address those certain things. And remember, as a collaborative, we're here to all help each other. So it's really kind of why I had it. There's a lot of different directions that you'll go in, but those are things that happen and just to be expected. And last but not least is I felt there was always a stigma of people being afraid to speak up, or if they did, it was just another disabled person complaining about things. And the whole idea is that we're there to support, be respectful of everyone, include people, and realize that there's a lot of situations and everyone involved needs to realize what it's like to be in that other person's shoes and understand that. even from that perspective, when I was mentioned earlier, when people talk passionate about something, it doesn't mean they're angry. So keep that in mind when you start running these other programs. I really think it's really avoid that stigmatism. And then last but not least, and this is what, Julie's group with CCDC, Colorado CCDC. Now I can't even say it off the top of my head. Sorry about that. But the thing is, be involved, whether it's at the state level, whether it's the legislation parts of things that are happening, or whether it's just being involved in the community to keep everyone else aware of what's going on. I think that's a big part, is to realize that you are part of a community, part of a collaborative, and to keep things moving together to get things resolved. So with that, I'm just going to pass this on to my esteemed colleague, Mr. John Barry, and let him have at it here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kurt. Can folks hear me okay?
You sound great.
So. Okay. So this is John Barry, and I do stakeholder relations, and I want to say I'm one of many people who does stakeholder engagement work in the Office of Community Living in the department. And the Office of Community Living, or OCL, is basically that part of the agency that administers long-term services and supports. So what I want to, it's been a fabulous experience being with this group, facilitating it, and being with it for 10 years, because I've never had the experience of being with a group like this that long to really have a deepening sort of understanding about what it is, what it could be. And one thing I want to mention is that there's a downside to being an ongoing committee that goes on for 10 years, and there's always, it's just a human thing. It's not a state agency thing, it's not a stakeholder thing, but I think it's that we need to look every once in a while, take a fresh look at what's going on to see how we should be doing things. And I think we're in that process right now, as Julie mentioned before, that we're looking at, well, this group, and Kurt mentioned as well, we see the participation being down a little bit, and the question is, well, what do people need? How well does this particular collaborative meet the needs of the people who receive services across the state? One of the basic facts of this group is that it has been, by and large, a monthly meeting, 3 hours long. That's a long meeting, whether you're in person, on the phone, whatever. And then that may not meet the needs of a lot of people. We're trying to figure that out as we go. But the group began through, I would say, some very successful advocacy. And when I say that, I want to mean that it was very uncomfortable for the department, because we had a pilot program that was I came in just after that ended, a couple of years after that ended, and it was really great. And it was translated into ongoing HCBS services that were not making people very happy. Plus, the department had pretty poor communication around it. Plus, I believe that the department at that time was not very interested in hearing from stakeholders. And so when we had basically a rebellion and people saying, this needs to be changed, and we are demanding that it be changed, the word collaborative was put forward, and I mean in a big way by advocates, to say we want this to be a collaborative. Well, I think that word scared a lot of people in the department. In the meantime, the context is that our department and OCL have gone through an evolution, and I truly believe this, that it's toward more transparency. It's toward wanting to hear more from advocates and from people who receive services. And so there's a lot more comfort with this group and the fact that it's called collaborative, and that we really do want to share power. And I think that at least for me and some of the staff I know, it seems now totally consistent with self-direction. Like, well, if you're going to have self-direction, you need to have, in some ways, a self-directed stakeholder engagement, or at least collaboratively created engagement. So, but it was really uncomfortable. And for those people out there in state agencies, I would say, if you're not doing this type of a thing and you're thinking about it, just know that, I mean, as a social worker, part of my training was to understand that even in the field of social work, there was certainly paternalism, patriarchy, power differentiation, power differential, and so it just is incredible how I think it took a lot of time and it took a lot of struggle for us to come to terms with that this is really a valuable group for us. Transparency is huge in this, and I find that as a state person, I need to be continually transparent about how this whole thing works. I have many stakeholders come to me and say, hey, John, I want to be able to have voting rights, or mark me down as attending, or give me an excused absence this month. And I have to remind people that, for example, just one little thing, probably not so little, voting rights are actually a thing managed by and decided by the stakeholders, not the state at all. We have no voting rights, as Julie said, but we also don't get to say who does and does not vote. That's entirely up to the stakeholders. And I really have to convince some stakeholders, new ones, sometimes, I set a timer for myself. So I didn't go over, and now I'm messing up the whole call. Sorry. And I'll wrap it up now because my 5 minutes are up here. But I just want to say that, for example, I have to point out to some new stakeholders that, no, I don't determine whether you vote or not. Bring it up in a meeting. That's up to other stakeholders. One of the things that we're going through now is the simple fact, again, that this is a long-term committee. It's been going on for 10 years now, and we run the risk of getting stuck in doing things because that's the way they've always been done, when the basis of this committee was to shake everything up and not do it like it had been done. So I'm really glad to be part of this. It's been a learning for me, and I think indeed the whole COVID thing really has shown me that having a level playing field where everybody is either on the phone or in person, one way or the other, and it really can't be in person. So the whole virtual route is really the way to go to level the playing field for people who don't have time, can't afford to come because of a disability. They can't get it into a building. They can't afford to pay for parking. So I will stop myself. There's so much more to be said, but I'm sure it'll come out in the questions and answers. So I will turn things back over to, is it Molly?
Great. Yes, thank you, John, and thank you, Kurt and Julie, as well. I've been sitting here learning more about how you guys have been approaching your collaborative. And for everyone listening, we're switching gears now where we're going to have a little bit of a discussion. I'm going to ask all of our speakers today some different questions. We're also saving time at the end for those of you listening to submit questions. So as you're taking all of this in, folks who are listening, please don't forget you can submit your comments and questions in the Q&A pod in the lower left side of your screen. But to get us started, the first thing I want to talk about is, and Julie, you had already referenced this a little bit, but a hot topic I know is high on everyone's minds is that pretty much all Medicaid-funded self-direction programs are really grappling with electronic visit verification, or EVV, implementation right now. And stakeholder engagement is such an essential ingredient for a successful EVV rollout. So I'd love to hear a little more about how your collaborative has been engaged in EVV implementation, and what are some best practices you might recommend both to people who are self-directing and state leaders in other states that are really struggling to collaborate effectively on EVV. And if you don't mind, Julie, I'll see if you want to kick us off since I know you were already thinking about this topic.
Sure. EVV is a huge source of frustration, and I want to apologize because it was unfortunately the congressperson from Colorado, from Denver, who created this nightmare in a law in 2016, which we have noted very clear we're very unhappy about. So we've done it in two ways. One is the state has which I believe every state is required to have stakeholder engagement in EVV, and so we have folks who are part of those meetings, and in that there is a participant-directed subcommittee. There's also, I think, there might even be a family caregiver subcommittee. I'm not sure if that's tied in with that, but there have been meetings with that group. And then we've also had it as a standing item at every single PDPPC meeting for the past, I don't know, year and a half or so. One of the things that we needed to do is to really get clarity as to what is required by CMS, like what is the least you have to do, and what can we do and you know, what are things that some states were going above and beyond with, because some folks in our community were hearing from like these horror stories from other states, and we wanted to make sure that didn't happen in Colorado. We actually at one point did go to a legislator. We're going to run a bill to kind of say what Colorado could and couldn't do, and the state agreed to pretty much do everything we asked without legislation. So that was fine. And again, it was basically don't do any more than CMS is mandating. We did, one of the mistakes we made is, I think, focusing too much on the state and not enough on the FMSs. Knowing what I know now, and I don't even know time-wise if that would be possible, I would have put more stuff in the FMS, asked for more stuff in the FMS contract about how their systems had to work, because a lot, you know, initially the frustration was the rules. The new frustration is with some of the FMS platforms, and because they all work in multiple states, that's kind of hard, and that's where you get into what's procurement, what isn't, what can we know, what can't we know. But we certainly can make recommendations for what goes in contract language. And then the other thing that we haven't gotten to yet is, you know, we've been doing it for a while now, but we haven't had the, I guess, like hard launch versus soft launch. So we haven't really gotten good data on what percentage of people are doing exceptions